of Mystery Unsolved. I am, of course, your host, Justin Bienvenu, and tonight we have a not a special episode, but a unique and different episode, as we don't really know if it's a mystery at all. I am, of course, talking about the outlaw Jesse James. What exactly is a mystery that is unsolved about Jesse James? Well, there was a man who claimed to be James, didn't in fact die at age 34. Without further ado, Mystery Unsolved, Jesse James. And for some reason, my tablet doesn't want to. Okay. John Frank Dalton was a possible centenarian who drew notice late in life by successfully claiming to be two long dead famous Western historical figures, lawman Frank Dalton and outlaw Jesse James. So not only was this man claiming to have been Jesse James, but before that, he claimed to be U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton. In the 1930s and early 1940s, J. Frank Dalton attracted considerable attention by telling tales of being Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton, after historians confronted him with compelling evidence to the effect that he could not be the same man as Marshal Frank Dalton. Starting in April 1948 in Lawton, Oklahoma, he took up claiming to be Jesse James instead. So my first comment is, why the hell would you claim to be Jesse James right after claiming to be a U.S. Marshal? And it got, you know, debunked. Like, they're like, we know you're not him. Oh, I'm actually Jesse James. What? Yeah. What are you talking about? J. Frank Dalton was allegedly over 100 years old at the time of his first public appearance as Jesse James at Lawton, claiming in an affidavit that he had been a member of the Quantrill guerrillas during the Civil War. Though he convinced several people of note, such as journalist novelist Robert Rohr, extensive research by historians have never been able to verify Dalton's claims, and recent DNA evidence supports the traditional accounts of James's death in 1882. This has been heavily disputed by a book written by distant relatives of Jesse James. J. Frank Dalton died in 1951. So there's a lot to take in there. But again, I'll go over it. Um, again, we're here for Jesse James, not him claiming to be Frank Dalton. But I'm just going to read the last paragraph, which pretty much signifies what did it for historians and other people who knew for a fact that he wasn't actually Frank Dalton. And maybe it'll shed some light as to why he thought he could claim to be Jesse James afterwards too. While a resident of the Roper Hotel in Marble Falls, Texas, in the early 1940s, J. Frank Dalton claimed to be the famous lawman of the Old West named John Franklin Frank Dalton, who from 1884 until his death in 1887 had served as Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas, administered out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, with jurisdiction including Oklahoma and/or the Indian Territory. He had previously made such claims while living in Independence County, Arkansas. Contrary to J. Frank Dalton's claims, the marshal was shot and killed in the line of duty on November 27, 1887, in a gun battle with members of the Smith-Dixon gang. So there's probably a lot more evidence to this, which is why historians and people were like, yeah, you're not the famous U.S. Marshal. There's just no way. Like, we have his body, we know. Now we get to the good stuff. Why he then suddenly claimed to be Jesse James after it was debunked that he couldn't have been the U.S. Marshal. Like, it's one thing to pretend you're one. It's one thing to pretend you're somebody else, but it's another thing to be like to do it twice. Like, that's crazy talk. Following the death of Jesse James' hoaxer William John James in 1947, Orvis Lee Hawk, Orvis Lee Hawk, who claimed to be the grandson of J. Frank Dalton and later renamed himself Jesse Lee James III, engineered Dalton's adoption of a new identity as Old West outlaw Jesse James. So before Frank Dalton claimed that he was Jesse James, there was another guy pretending he was Jesse James. Like, what is it about this guy that they? What is it about this guy? Signing himself as J. Frank Dalton, the old man on April 24th, 1948, executed an affidavit recounting the details of the historical Jesse James's birth and claimed to be the famous outlaw. The affidavit was published with additional historical information about James and the claim in the newspaper, The Lawton Constitution, in the following month. On May 22nd, 1948, Dalton made 2 public appearances in Lawton's business district, giving speeches at each location. Dalton posed as Jesse James in front of the crowds and spoke about what life was like in the days of the Old West. This fed into not infrequent claims that Jesse James had faked his death in 1882 and adopted an alias, and Dalton's account incorporated many aspects told prior Jesse James imposter, William John James. So, if anything, he just listened to stories that the other hoaxer who claimed to be Jesse James did, and then no one probably remembered him but him. And he's like, oh, well, now that he's dead, I want to claim to be the real Jesse James. Reading too fast. James expert Homer Croy went to Lawton and found Dalton unable to answer many questions the authentic James should have known. But Hawk continued to promote Dalton as Jesse James. So that's interesting. Dalton couldn't answer this man's questions, and this guy knows everything there is to know about Jesse James and couldn't answer him. But despite not being able to answer, Hawk still promotes the guy as Jesse James. On hearing of the claim, Rudy Torelli, the manager of Merrimack Caverns in Missouri, arranged to bring Dalton to his site and launched a major promotional campaign. It was there that in June 1949, Dalton was interviewed by journalist Robert C. Roark, who then published a 3-article account of his interview. Dalton, claiming to be 102 years old, told Roark that the man shot and killed in 1882 and identified as Jesse James was actually a similar-looking house guest of James named Charlie Bigelow. Okay. Dalton related that after Bigelow's murder, he fled to Kansas City, Memphis, New Orleans, and Florida, then to Brazil, and later to Mexico. Did anybody know that if this is in fact Jesse James, that he was a traveling man? I've been down this every road now, yeah, here, man. Or however that song goes. I've been everywhere, man. Yeah, that's apparently that's what Jesse James did. He claimed to have eventually returned to Oklahoma, where he was elected to the territorial legislature under the name James Frank Dalton before relocating to Texas. Lot of travel. Lot of travel. But my refute here is going to be, well, maybe he did do all this so that they couldn't say one way or the other, because if nobody knew who this guy was prior to him coming to Oklahoma and Texas, then him saying he was New Orleans, Memphis, Brazil, nobody knows who this guy was. So like technically he could claim to be anybody, including Jesse James. Dalton's account of himself as Jesse James did not hold up under questioning from James's surviving relative. Oh shit. A debate between support Roark and the critic Croy was broadcast nationally by CBS. On September 5, 1949, Torelli, along with cavern owner Lester B. Dill, hosted what was claimed to be a 102nd birthday party for Dalton as Jesse James, also inviting James Russell Davis of Nashville, who claimed to be Cole Younger. Wow, it's just like a good old-fashioned old people claiming to be outlaws party. Who's next? Billy the Kid? A 110-year-old Oklahoma man who claimed to have known both outlaws was invited and made a positive identification, while a 1930s-era Oklahoma bank robber was also invited. What? You're lucky the 110-year-old man knows that he's alive, never mind being able to identify two people that he claims are, in fact, famous outlaws. And why invite a 1930s era Oklahoma bank robber? The next day, Dalton was posed for a photograph with another Old West pretender, Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid. Ah, look at that. And the two would offer mutual support for each other's claims. J. Frank Dalton died on August 15, 1951 in Granbury, Texas, and a post-mortem examination was said to have found several of the distinguishing body marks and features that the real Jesse James was rumored to have had, including numerous bullet wounds, a rope burn around his neck, a damaged fingertip, and severely burned feet. This claim differs from earlier reports that showed Dalton's finger was to the wrong finger, and that he had no evidence of chest wounds, which Hawk explained by claiming skin grafts had been performed. Dalton's death certificate was recorded with the name of the man he claimed to be, Jesse Woodson James, the name also appearing on a gravestone erected at his burial site in Granbury Cemetery in 1983. In 1966, Torelli offered a $10,000 reward for anyone who could prove that Dalton was not James. After the daughter-in-law and grandchildren of the real Jesse James presented their evidence, it ended in a court case in which they were ruled to have satisfied the burden of proof, and Torelli was ordered to pay the reward. The decision was upheld on appeal, but Torelli died in 1972, never paying. So the family of Jesse James proved that Frank Dalton was not, in fact, Jesse James. So this mystery has actually been solved. Although, there is a little bit more. Exhumations. In 1995, the gravesite historically attributed to Jesse James at the Mount Olivet Cemetery in Kearney, Missouri, was exhumed. The remains were examined and found to be consistent with James' historical record, and mitochondrial DNA analysis performed on the remains were found to match two matrin, matrin, matrilineal, wow, I've never seen that word before, I apologize. Two matrilineal relatives of the historic outlaw, leaving no scientific basis of doubting that it was indeed the outlaw, Jesse James, whose remains had been transferred to Mount Olivet in 1902 from the gravesite on the James family farm where he had been buried in 1882. So, again, I told you there's a chance that this might not have been a mystery, but still a good one. You have to admit, like, there's a lot of crazy, crazy stuff in this. That's why I wanted to do it. The conformed with an earlier This conformed with an earlier handwriting analysis performed in 1986, which concluded that examples of Dalton's handwriting did not match that found an 1880 letter written by Jesse James. So, yeah, J. Frank Dalton. Like your first, I'll get to my analysis at the end, so I'll save my thoughts. Beginning in 1996, amateur historian Bud Hardcastle, what a name that is, with the support of three sons of James' descendant Jesse Cole James, began a push to exhume the Granbury, Texas grave belonging to Dalton to allow DNA testing of the remains. The three James brothers believed that J. Frank Dalton was their grandfather and that he was also the real Jesse James. An initial petition to the Hood County, Texas court was declined that year, but a subsequent request was approved in 2000. During the exhumation, which occurred on May 30th, 2000, the investigative team found two coffins at the gravesite, a large steel vault and a wooden casket. And since the exhumation order was restricted to one coffin, that closest to the tombstone, the steel vault, was removed for study. However, when the contents of steel vaults were examined, they proved to be the remains of one armed Granbury resident named William Henry Holland, leaving the question of Dalton's genetic identity unanswered. So, see, there's a little bit of mystery there at the end. If J. Frank Dalton wasn't Jesse James, who was it? Was it even J. Frank Dalton at all? because obviously he wasn't Jesse James and he wasn't U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton. So, wow. I told you, it's not exactly unsolved, but it's definitely still a mystery in its own sense. To me, though, the nail in the coffin was right off the bat. After people proved that he wasn't U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton, the fact that he then claimed, "Oh, I'm actually the former outlaw Jesse James." Why would anybody even remotely give this man the time of day? Why? Apparently, that was like the thing to do in the 30s and 40s. Claim it's the outlaw, and then people apparently were so gullible in the 30s and 40s, which I have stated in prior videos that people in the 40s were extremely gullible, and apparently this video proves it as well. And they were so gullible that they're like, "Oh, wow, maybe it's Jesse James." And surely there was somebody among the crowd that was like, "Are you kidding me? The man just claimed to be a U.S. Marshal. Now he's claiming to be an outlaw? So how do you go from being claiming to be a U.S. Marshal, claiming to be an outlaw? That's two totally different sides of the spectrum." Normally, I would say, "What do you think?" But I'm not. I don't even have to do that to this video because it's technically solved. We know that J. Frank Dalton was not Jesse James. That has been scientifically and factually proven for a fact. The better question here is why? Why did J. Frank Dalton claim to be U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton? And then after that was proved that he wasn't, why did he claim to be Jesse James? Like, what did he have to gain? I mean, obviously, there's the notoriety, but like, was this man's life so boring and dull that he had nothing better to do than to claim that he was famous people of the West, which he wasn't one and he wasn't the other? So the better question here, I think the biggest mystery of all, take from it, is just who in the hell was John Frank Dalton and why, other than to get his jollies off, did he pretend to be U.S. Marshal Frank Dalton and then later Jesse James? I do hope you enjoyed this video of Mystery Unsolved. Again, it's a little bit different, a little unconventional, but the same old style and problematic mystery result. Do stay tuned for the next episode where I'll be talking about John Wilkes Booth, another one similar to Jesse James, where a man later on in life claims to have been John Wilkes Booth. Once again, I am Justin Bienvenu. This has been Mystery Unsolved, Jesse James. Until next time.